Hey guys, how's it going today? So, what I'm interested in doing today is talking a little bit about therapy, a little bit about, or give you some tips on what is and might not be useful as someone with Schizoid PD, or, this may count for a lot of peeps in other cluster A department type stuff. In any case, one of the main issues is when you go in for therapy, you go into either therapist or a psychologist, psychiatrist, or whatever. A lot of the issues is that most of the treatments and the types of therapy that are going to be provided to you are normally effective to treat all sorts of things, but they might not be very effective when dealing with something like a personality disorder, and especially might not be effective when dealing with a personality disorder that is considered to have very idiosyncratic or eccentric or kind of anti-institutional sort of thinking and things like that, or some kind of categorical pessimism toward things like institutions, or even more specifically psychology and therapy of this type, for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons I won't get into right now, but there are very specific reasons, in my opinion. In any case, regardless of all those reasons and the thinking, many times what I hear from different schizoids is that I've gone to therapy. I've been to therapy for years. I've gone to it a few times. It's failed. It doesn't work. They don't understand. I explain it. They don't get it. They think it's this. They think it's that. So on and so on and so forth, right? And so that causes the patient to become discouraged, to become distraught, to resign themselves to a life of uh, the world's inability to help them in any capacity, right? That's usually what happens. And honestly, I can't blame them, considering the state of affairs that they're dealing with. So, let me explain a couple of things. I've been there, I've gone through those fun roller coasters. And honestly, you're kind of right. But at the same time, some of you might be kind of wrong. And I'll explain what I mean. Now, most therapists, psychologists are not really that well trained in personality disorders. In fact, the vast majority of them probably want to stay away from them. They're kind of considered difficult, and they're also considered not really worth the stress and effort it requires to even get through to people with such issues by a lot of practitioners out there, a lot of psychologists and therapists, because the issue is it's a lot more work, it's a lot more effort, it's a lot more grief, it's a lot more of a lot of things. And they don't necessarily make more money doing that. There's no major incentive for the person dealing with personality disorders to want to do so outside of personal curiosity, humanitarian interest, just all sorts of academic, you know, data collecting or something like that. There really isn't that much that would incentivize especially neurotypical therapist or psychologist to want to deal with this, tackle this, regardless of the type of PD we're discussing. Some PDs are a little more popular as far as like more people possess them. They're a lot less rare, and so there's already a lot of therapy and a lot of ideas that have developed on how to tackle them. So there's more of a not a streamlined process, but there's more of a mainstream understanding about how to approach some of these things. Though there's a lot of legwork still to be done. Something like in the cluster A department, when we're talking schizotypal, schizoid, paranoid, there's a lot less information there to work with for the psychologist, and the what information is there requires them to do a lot of legwork. And honestly, they're just not incentivized to do it unless, like I said, they're curious. They have some like empathy toward people with these kind of neurodivergent natures and so on and so forth, and all the issues that come with trying to help them. That's all I can really think of. because there isn't a lot of situations in which it's like, oh, you're going to focus on personality disorders. That's going to make you so much more money. I mean, not really. And the issue too is that people with personality disorders generally don't have a lot of money necessarily, especially if they're low functioning, because they're not going to be exactly, especially if we're talking schizoids, they're not going to be exactly wealthy or interested in collecting wealth and amassing wealth. And so, generally speaking, you're not going to have a lot of situations where a doctor is going to be really given a lot of money to deal with these particular issues. I mean, there are people out there that make a living, but they have to get their name out there and they have to network in the right ways. Other than that, it's a difficult path to take, and I've heard that from more than one psychologist. Now, I know this all sounds really black pilling and really, depressing or whatever. I don't want it to be that. I want to explain something a little more silver lining about what I'm trying to say. Now, when I went to therapy, and I'm not going to go over these 14 types. It's ridiculous. I don't have time for that. But I will go over just a couple, the first couple ones, and how they affected me, because luckily, the first couple ones are the ones that I mostly was impacted by. I experimented with a lot of these by myself, but I've done a few of these with clinical help, if you will. And I'll explain as I go through them why they're valuable, even to somebody with schizoid PD. Now, one of the approaches that I highly suggest when looking at something like CBT or anything else for that matter is a lot of schizoids tend to have a very sort of, I don't know how to describe it, like a self-holistic perspective of their issues or problems, right? So they want to get to the core. They want to get to the main issue a lot of the time. They're trying to figure out what's happening, right? And even after they get their diagnosis, they're like, "Oh, how do I repair these schisms and so on as they're described? What do I do? How do I, you know, the problem is that there isn't really enough information to fully comprehend where these schisms are coming from. I have my theories, but again, there needs to be a lot of research done, and there's still a long way to go. But in any case, it doesn't mean that you have to continuously suffer in every way, shape, and form. So, what I mean by this is take care of some of the symptoms, right? I know they always say, oh, that takes care of the symptom, but doesn't cure the disease, or whatever it is they say. It alleviates the symptom, but, kind of like medication, right? It doesn't actually like necessarily, like you take a Tylenol, right? It's going to get rid of the pain, but it's not really going to get rid of the underlying issue that's causing the pain, right? Your body's going to do that if it's, say, something like a wound or a cut or a headache. But if it's like a disease or something, all you're doing is covering it up, right? You're not really fixing the source of the problem. Reasonable position, but unreasonable if you think that that means that doing something about the symptoms or some of the issues that make one less functional is pointless, even if you can't quite get to the source yet. That's a silly way to think, because you're just going to be stuck in a loop at that point. So this is my suggestion to any schizoids, and I think some cluster A's would understand what I'm trying to say. When you go see your therapist, unless you have a therapist, obviously, that is well versed and well trained in dealing with the type of PD that you possess, don't expect them to be able to handle it. Okay, and if you expect them to, and you put it right in front of them, if they're not trained in it and they don't fully understand it, even if they decide to go read some books after dealing with you, they're one, it's going to take them a lot more effort than just reading a couple of things to comprehend what's happening. Two, there's a lack of information for some of this stuff, so even if they did, they still wouldn't have a full picture. And the people that have a much better picture are kind of like niche in the spreading of their methodologies and stuff like that, because there isn't a lot of people already all that interested in dealing with something like schizoid PD. And so My approach is use them because they're professionals, right? They're there to be used for, their skills and things like that. Use them to solve or alleviate the problems they can help you with. Okay? So, you have anxiety, right? I used to deal with something like panic attacks all the time. A few years ago, I was having, well, let me see here. I probably had like a panic attack every 2 days for like 4 years. It was horrific. Like, it was all the time. Like mini ones, big ones, in the middle of the night ones. I had a panic disorder, right? So when a panic disorder means is it's kind of like a meta panic. So you have panic attacks about having panic attacks, right? So that can be pretty gnarly. So thinking about the possibility of a panic attack turns into one, and so you get in these really vicious cycles. Um, and I have to be in some constant state of distraction in order to avoid thinking about that. But you know how that is. Don't think about the pink elephant. Don't think about the pink elephant. You're gonna think about the pink elephant no matter what you do. So what I mean is I had to deal with that problem because I had things to do. Right? I was a covert schizoid, so I knew I had to get a job to be done. I couldn't live a neat life, unfortunately. I had to work. I had to do this. I had to do that. I had a new kid on the or had a kid on already, and they were little, and I had so much on my plate. I needed to find a way through these panic attacks, right? Because they were just making life impossible for me. That's what I focused on, right? I went to my therapist. We did a bunch of CBT. I'm not going to get into how CBT works or anything like that. There's plenty of information out there on that kind of stuff. But CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, allowed me in many ways to sort of think myself out of these patterns that cause the panic disorder, right? It took a lot of effort, a lot of help, so on and so forth, but nonetheless, it had a positive impact on that. Now, this is what I mean. CBT is probably not going to help you all that much. I can't claim for everyone, but it didn't for me especially. It's not going to help you all that much with some of these core personality disorder related issues. Okay? It's not. And part of the reason is because of, like I've discussed before, some of the neurodivergent aspects of people that possess this personality disorder. And that's my armchair bullshit. So don't run with that one. In any case, CBT is often told to me by Zoids that it just does nothing for them. It does nothing for them. It doesn't let them talk about the problem. It doesn't let them deal with this or that or find any connection to their emotions and so on and so forth. Okay, understood. Don't use it for that. It's not going to work for that. Okay, so my suggestion is that if you have a therapist and your therapist is not, well trained in dealing with something like cluster A personality disorders, I highly suggest you don't even. There's no point. My suggestion, my don't take non-professional advice, is don't even bring up the subject, honestly, to your therapist, unless you're asking them to find you someone or help you find someone that can deal with it. Because, like I said, most of them aren't trained in personality disorders, right? And oftentimes, when you go to a therapist and you have a certain personality disorder, there's a good possibility that they probably won't want to take you if they see on your diagnosis or pre-diagnosis that you have PD. They'll probably find a reason to not or say they can't. That's happened a lot to a lot of people. But in any case, you want to deal with the symptom of anxiety. Use the CBT for that. CBT helped me extremely for that sort of stuff, right? It didn't get rid of all my anxiety. What I had to combine with it was medication. Again, medication, useful for dealing with certain negative symptoms that make you less functional, which in turn make the PD situations much, much worse. But if you alleviate some of these symptoms, guess what? You can be a little more functional. Even if it isn't a whole lot more, it still makes life a little less horrible. Okay? Dialectical behavior therapy. Another one that's useful. Another one that helped me with a lot of anxiety. This one helped with some of the depression. I used to have more often severe spikes in major depression. I deal with having dysthymia. I'm okay with it, or dysthymia. I'm okay with the dysthymia at this point. I've been living with it my entire life practically. So that I can manage and deal with. That doesn't get to me. What gets to me is some of these episodes of major depression. And they can get really, really bad, right? And you could start dealing with ideation and all kinds of other shit like that. Dialectical behavior therapy could be useful to help some of that, along with proper medication. That does have a positive impact on you. I'm not saying it will. It just depends on the person. It depends on your chemicals. It depends on your biology and everything else. The point is, this is not going to take care of the source issue. You're not going to be able to, like, it's not going to hash out any of that stuff. It's not going to make the world make more sense to you or any of those things, probably. Especially, like I said, if you're schizoid and dealing with some cluster A action, ain't going to happen. I'm sorry. That's my advice. I'm just some dumb guy on the internet, but that's my thought on the matter. But this helped me deal with some of that ideation action. Okay? Useful for that kind of stuff. Now, this is a big one for me. EMDR. EMDR was super EMDR was super useful for me to start connecting some of my issues, phobias, problems to my actual past and whatever trauma I endured, right? So there was essentially blockages in my memory. And again, my stupid theory, my stupid ideas, I think that EMDR, it can be useful to someone that's schizoid because the process is to basically access, the idea is to access different parts of the brain that are normally less accessible because of the trauma or other issues. I noticed that it let me access more of the emotional side of things that were normally very much suppressed when doing this, when accessing memories, as few as I did have. When accessing memories, it allowed me to sort of hone in on the emotions associated with those memories, right? And not just the negative emotions. There was also positive emotions that were confusing to be finding there, considering the trauma. So, and then actually locating where the negative and painful parts of the trauma actually derive, where they came from, where they stemmed from. It helped me a lot with that. The EMDR was useful for that process. It's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. It might make you feel, it might temporarily increase that emotional range to a very uncomfortable point for that period, for that session. It can be very exhausting. But if you're looking to tap into some of that stuff, cool. It's very useful for that. Is it going to fix you? I don't think so. Is it going to help you fix yourself? Definitely can. Okay. Could it be harmful? There's people that argue that. Okay. I don't know. In my situation, it let me tap into stuff, let me find some sources, and then it let me figure out what to do with that information. Okay. Now, like I said, not every professional is trained in everything. So make sure that if you do something like EMDR with your therapist or psychologist or whatever, make sure there's someone that knows it well and is trained in it. This is not one of those that you want to just have somebody that dabbles with it doing it too much. It can be rough. Okay? But again, this is not going to deal or fix or repair a lot of the aspects or mechanisms and adaptations associated to your personality disorder, but it could help you alleviate some of the stuff like the depression and anxiety and the occurrences and the levels in which it hits, right? It's essentially just to make things a little more functional for you so that you can use that extra energy to actually, even if it's solo dolo, deal with the deeper, more internal issues that are difficult to express in any emotional way, or to express, or you feel like another human being, especially one that's trying to help you via therapy, could truly understand. All right, I know what that's like. I get it. Lastly, exposure therapy. I know, like I said, there's like 10 more a lot of these are kind of like connected in a lot of ways, are inspired by previous ones in many respects. So there's a big web here if you look at a timeline of how these develop and everything else. For me, exposure therapy is something that's been useful for my agoraphobia. So now I deal with agoraphobia without a panic disorder because some of the previous types of therapy help me with the panic disorder, especially if we're talking the DBT and the CBT, right? So, and then doing the EMDR helped me kind of realize where the agoraphobia was coming from, right? So then with all that under my belt, some exposure has actually been pretty useful because now I'm exposed, but now I have weapons at my disposal to deal with that exposure more in a more healthy behavior, in a more healthy response. I still deal with it. It's still rough, but I can deal with it a lot better than I used to be able to. And I'm still working on it. But nonetheless, here we go. And that's just me talking about my agoraphobia. I honestly think that that could be useful for all sorts of things. Okay? So, my suggestion, my schizoid tip here is stop trying to go to therapy to deal with these kind of super big existential philosophical who am I, what am I, do I even exist, the stuff that sometimes causes like these kind of strong ideas of disassociation and things like that. Okay, maybe that stuff, unless you find somebody that's trained with dealing and talking about that stuff on a really deep level, that is willing to, has the patience and has the interest as a psychologist, that might be rough. Okay. But a lot of the stuff that makes you suffer, totally, totally doable. Okay. Totally doable. Not all of it. That's unrealistic. And I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Consider the situation, considering the severity of certain things. I think one has to take a somewhat a pragmatic approach to what it is that you can actually take care of. Because I made that mistake. I made the mistake of thinking I want to get to the everything, right? And I attempted to, and all it would bring back oftentimes is disappointment. And I didn't find anything other than that until I met my current psychologist, who knew because I had searched for somebody that's dealt with PDs when I was doing a search for it. So I found somebody that has dealt with them, and that's why they were able to help me a lot better than probably somebody that wasn't trained in them properly in any capacity. Okay, I got lucky. It's a matter of luck combined with research and patience. Okay, and I know depending on the country you live in and your situation, that's difficult. You might not have access to a top tier of any kind psychologist out there that could help you with some of these PD related things. But even if you can get somebody that could help you with, I guess what would be considered some, and it's not to downplay it, basic bitch, like, uh, not like stuff that more psychologists are trained in and stuff that a lot of neurotypical people deal with. Not to, like I said, downplay it. This stuff is fucking rough. Um, you can, you can get some help for some of that. Okay, that's my not black pill, not white pill, my kind of gray pill. Okay, my realistic pill on the subject. I hope you guys found it useful. Please leave a comment. Blah 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 blah. Also, give me your money if possible. Any donations through PayPal are super useful. They should be in the description or in the about me. If you like my content, if you like the streams, I offer a few different things on the Patreon. Check it out. Please join me there. It's incredibly useful so I can continue my work and continue helping Zoids and the such. I hope this was of use to you. Goodbye.